Good morning and happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
My name is Pastor Chelsea, and it is my joy to get to welcome you to this time of worship when we remember that the presence of the risen Christ is here among us. Know that you are welcome here, that this story of Easter, this story of hope that we celebrate today, reminds us that none of us are defined by our past. It reminds us of the newness and the hope and the possibilities that God's love opens in our lives. And so we are all welcomed to this story. We are all welcomed to live again in this story of hope. And as we do so, we remember that the story doesn't start off with this giant crescendo. It starts off silent, with the sun breaking forth on a new day, with a tomb discovered empty, with people puzzled and confused, and slowly but surely, those signs, those news, those stories of resurrection grow and grow and grow and build into this beautiful story of hope that we live in today. And so as we enter into this time of worship, we enter in with a moment of stillness, a moment to center ourselves here. And so I invite you, as the light of Christ comes forward and reminds us that the presence of the risen Christ is here with us, I invite you to take a couple deep breaths, to get comfortable where you are, to let go of those things that are sitting on the edges of your mind, those lists of things you have to do, the Easter brunch that awaits you, all of those busyness of the day. I invite you to let it go. You can pick it up again in an hour. It will still be there. But for now and for this moment, we quiet our hearts. We center ourselves here and prepare ourselves to receive again this gift of hope, this gift of Easter. So we enter into this Easter story in stillness and in silence, as the first rays of sun are just breaking forth on that new day, and as these women come to the tomb to offer the final preparations for Jesus' burial. What they find surprises them. And so as we hear this story, I invite you to perhaps close your eyes, to allow these words to wash over you, and to listen. What surprises you in this story?
But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them to be an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and then he went home, amazed at what had happened.
We hear a wide range of responses to the news of resurrection in this story. We hear doubt, confusion, glimmering hope, questions. And I find it comforting that such a wide range of feelings and emotions and thoughts can exist in such a short story in just those first few minutes of Easter Sunday. Because isn't it true that so often that range can exist inside each of us at the same time? We may greet the news of Easter with hope with questions, with our own confusion all at once. And yet God keeps on telling us this story that Jesus rises, that we rise. The story that we hear sung to us as we experience this time in our year when we move from winter into the beauty and the newness of spring. This story sung to us each time we fall down because we are tripped or because we've stumbled and we still manage to get back up. This story that is sung to us each time we discover that we have survived the change and the loss and the disappointment that we thought would bring everything to an end. This story that is sung to us each time we are forgiven and each time we offer someone else forgiveness. This is not just a story that we hear read once a year in church. This is a story that God speaks to us every single day. Every single day, this story of hope and possibility and life. The story that says, you will rise. You will rise. And so, even though we greet that story with our own mix of confusion, our own blend of doubt and faith and hope and belief, God keeps on singing it, keeps on working it. This story tells us who God is, that God is the God who wills and who brings and who works new life into all the moments of our days. And so we hold on to that reminder as we worship God this morning, and I invite the children to come forward for the children's moment. Will you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth, may the thoughts of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. May you help us to hear in our hearts, to know in our souls the good news that you are bringing, the news of hope, of newness, of life. Amen. Amen. So we tend to come to church on Easter morning knowing what to expect, right? Who here thought that we would probably read the Easter story? Yeah. Anyone make that guess? It's a pretty safe guess. And we know how the story goes. And so we know that there will be grand music, there will be beautiful flowers, there will be an Easter egg hunt, there will be a big party to celebrate the news of resurrection, right? Mm-hmm. That's all good. Yeah. Those are good things. And yet, when we enter into the Easter story in this way, we miss part of the story. Because Easter is not about having our expectations met. Instead, it's about having our expectations turned completely upside down. It's about those reliable patterns of life that we live in, that we know so well. It's about having those shaken up in a way that forever changes us and our world. These women were kind of like us. They came on that first Easter morning knowing what to expect. They came with those spices they had prepared the night before for this exact moment, to offer one final act of love to Jesus and prepare his body for burial. But what they expected and what they found could not have been more different. Instead, they're surprised with this news, with these words, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" And I love the picture on the front of our bulletin today because you can see that surprise so plain. You can see the shock and surprise at those words. Those words that forced them to confront the assumption they had made that any other day would have been right, but today was wrong. Easter is a surprise. It's a day that reminds us that everything we think we know for certain, even those things that seem so absolute and unchanging, maybe is not so absolute after all. And so I think it's fitting that this year Easter happens to fall on April Fool's Day. Not because Easter was a joke, not because the women were fooled, but because it's a day that reminds us things are not always as they seem. And so we miss some of the power when we miss this surprise of Easter, when we know the story so well that we're no longer shocked by the ending. Because Easter wants to shock us. It wants to surprise us. It's a story that should leave us scratching our head and wondering, because this is a story that wants to shake us up. These women certainly were pretty shaken up. They run back to tell their friends the news. And if nothing else in this story reminds us just how surprising Easter is, I think the disciples' reaction certainly does. Remember, these are the closest friends and followers of Jesus. They've been hanging out with him for a while now. They've literally heard him tell them on multiple different occasions that this would happen. They've had their expectations shaken up in many different ways by miracles and strange teachings he's offered them. And yet, they still kind of shrug this story off as an idle tale. They think maybe it's a prank. Maybe the women in their grief have been tricked into some kind of false hope. But whatever has happened, they are certainly not buying it. They know for sure the world they live in, and it's a world where this kind of thing just doesn't really happen. I wonder why it was that the disciples were so stubbornly, impressively certain that the women must be wrong. Why they were so sure that they were right that only Peter went to go see the tomb for himself. The rest of them stubbornly stayed where they are. And I wonder, perhaps, if they were afraid. I wonder if they were afraid of being seen as foolish or gullible. I wonder if they were afraid of getting their hopes up, just to be disappointed again. I wonder if that pain and that grief of losing a dear friend and having their hopes dashed for the future he was going to create, if that was still too raw, and so they weren't willing to be vulnerable and open themselves up to hope. It would be easy for us to be hard on these disciples, right? We may think, come on, you got to see and follow Jesus face to face, and you're not going to believe now? But instead of being hard on them, maybe we can empathize with them and learn something from them. Because we also find ways to protect ourselves from being hurt. We also find ways to protect ourselves from feeling too vulnerable. We also tend to respond to pain and hurt in our lives by building up fortresses around ourselves. Because no one likes to experience more hurt than they need to, and no one likes to experience pain again and again. So we may build up these walls by trying to be perfect so that we never have to experience shame. We may build up these walls by not letting ourselves fully experience joy because we're worried that it will not last. We may build up these walls by trying to cling on to certainty because that way we won't be wrong. We may try to build up these walls by not trusting others or relying on others so that we won't end up being disappointed. We may use countless other bricks and stones in our lives to build up these walls between us and hurt. But the thing that the disciples learn in this story is that often when we try to protect ourselves from disappointment and hurt, we also end up protecting ourselves from hope and possibility. And so here comes Easter to shake us up, to shake us out of those ruts, to tell us, stop looking for life among dead stones. Roll those stones away. Tear down those fortresses you've built and take a risk on hope. Because hope is always a risk. It is always vulnerability. And the risk of hope that these women in this story take is truly stunning. Because if you remember back to the story, these angelic visitors didn't exactly give them a complete play-by-play of this is exactly what happened and how to explain it to other people so that you perfectly understand. That's not what they get. Instead, they probably still had uncertainty and questions and doubt, and probably didn't fully understand themselves. I imagine they carried with them this mix of fear and joy and sorrow and confusion and hope as they ran to go tell their friends. And yet they still went to spread that message, risking ridicule and disappointment, which they ultimately found. In doing so, they choose to live in hope rather than in fear. They choose to live in this story of surprise and vulnerability and beauty, the story of Easter that God is telling us in each and every moment of our days, this story that lives just beneath the surface, that says God is doing something new. God is bringing newness in even the most hopeless of places, and even a tomb can't stop it. In their willingness to take a risk, to be shaken up, to be open to this new thing God is doing, that is where the soil of hope is formed in this story. We see this hope, this Easter hope, is not a warm and fuzzy, rose-colored glasses type of hope that ignores all of those painful and hard places in the world. This is the hope that's proclaimed first in a tomb, after all. This is the type of hope that says, yes, those hard parts of life are true. Those painful and hopeless parts of life are true. But they are not the only truth. And so Easter asks us to be surprised by this hope that we find. This hope that might not come how we expect it, in a nice white shining robe. This hope that doesn't come all nice and pretty and easy. And thanks be to God, because wouldn't that hope be unrecognizable in our lives that are messy? Instead, the Easter hope we find looks more like risk. The risk of seeing God at work in our mess. The risk of hope that asks us to live differently, to chip away at those protections we've built up for ourselves, to take a risk and open ourselves up with vulnerability, to be a part of that new thing God is doing, even though it may be outside of our comfort zone, even though we may not be able to be in control there. Easter asks us to be surprised by hope, to live in this world with new eyes that see others, our world, and ourselves as that fertile dirt where God keeps on planting, watering, and loving into life seeds of resurrection newness each and every day, but especially today. Amen.